Hey friends, welcome back to Untamed Social Season 3. Today is our final episode for this season, and this one is going to be a little bit different. Over the past 9 episodes, I've talked to brand strategists, content creators, analysts, social media experts, who were all living in the trenches of social media every single day. And today I'm pulling together 5 of the most important lessons from all of them. The things that worked in 2025 that need to be transferred over into 2026. We're going to cover what's working and what's tired on social media, how the best brands are adapting, and the biggest mistakes to leave behind this year. So let's jump into it. Lesson number 1 is that good content just isn't enough anymore. And honestly, we need to retire the phrase, just focus on good content, because the internet is overflowing with good content. Everyone is making it. Every brand, every influencer, every niche account, most of it is solid, professional, informative. So why do some posts go viral and others, just as well made, get maybe 3 likes and a pity comment from your mom? Because good isn't what moves the needle anymore. Attention does, memory does, emotion does. Lauren Meekhoff and I talked about this actually in episode 1 of season 3, and she said something that really stuck with me. She said, the bar has been raised. Good content is now the price of entry. What wins is different content, bold content, content that punches through the scroll. So let's kind of unpack that for a minute. You know, good content means that your video is in focus, your caption is typo free, your design is on brand. But like, that's the baseline, right? That's the starting point at this time. It doesn't guarantee that anyone will care, let alone engage, or definitely doesn't mean that they're going to remember it. It's like showing up to a job interview and saying, I'm on time. Cool. You were supposed to be, right? So if you're creating content that checks all of the boxes, but it's still not performing, then this is your reality checks. And by checks, I mean check. This is your reality check. You're not doing anything wrong, but you're not doing anything memorable either. And social media is not about being perfect. Obviously, we know this. It's more about being memorable in under 3 seconds. Like, don't forget that part of it. And just to kind of like help with this, here's a simple test that I like to use with some of our clients. Open your feed, any social media platform, whichever one you prefer, take your pick, and scroll for 1 minute. And then after you've done that, I want you to ask yourself, what do you remember? Not what looked good or what you double tapped out of habit. What actually made you pause or made you rethink, or even what made you want to possibly send to a friend. It's usually something that made you feel something, right? Emotion is what gets content shared. It's what makes content stick. And right now, the most successful brands on social media are leaning into that truth. And by the way, your audience is starved for this, if you ask my opinion. The average person scrolls past 300 plus posts a day. That's crazy. And if you're not delivering an emotion, a surprise, or a shift in perspective, then you're just background noise, right? You're just one of those 300 plus posts per day that somebody scrolls past that they don't even remember what they consumed. So here's what we're seeing from top performing content in 2025 that you need to keep in mind. Number 1, brands are ditching polish, which I think we've been ditching polish for years, but I think we're finally like fully in that. And instead, they're embracing lo-fi, behind the scenes, or unfiltered moments that feel real. They're also really focusing on narrative-driven videos that don't just sell, they tell a story. Nike is a really great example of this, right? You typically don't see a Nike post where they're promoting a new shoe or new apparel. They're telling stories, real stories of athletes. That's how they're promoting their brand, by utilizing storytelling of athletes. Another thing that top performing content that we're seeing is voiceovers, but not just like voiceovers, that's like a marketing ad campaign, right? Voiceovers that sound like a friend. We're not trying to sound like a marketing department. And then another thing that we're also seeing performing well are carousels that teach one sharp idea really fast. And they're also not trying to be everything at once. So you have to ask yourself, when's the last time that you made content that made someone stop scrolling or made them think differently or feel something real? The odds are you don't have a content problem, you have a sameness problem. And that's actually good news because sameness is fixable. So the first lesson that we learned from 2025 that needs to be translated into 2026 is that good content just isn't enough anymore. Lesson number 2 that we've learned is that your brand voice is probably too safe. Because if I had $1 for every brand that said, we want to sound authentic and bold, and then they approve captions that read like a legal memo, I'd have enough money to buy Meta and rename it back to Facebook, okay? The brutal truth is that most brands' voices on social media are beige. They are boring. They're polite. They're predictable. They're polished to the point of being really invisible. And in 2025, that's not just boring. It's a liability, to be honest. We see, a lot of times we have these kickoff meetings with our clients where we ask them about their brand voice and their tone and what they want. And they'll say things like, we want to be professional, but also approachable. Or we want to sound credible, but fun. Okay, but what does that even mean? Because too often it means you're trying to be everything to everyone. And we all know that when you do that, you end up sounding like, say it with me, no one, right? Your content disappears into the scroll. And Alex M.H. Smith and I talked about in episode 2 of season 3, the importance of defining a point of view. Your voice should really tell me 2 things. Number 1, what hill are you willing to die on? And number 2, what do you believe your audience needs to hear, not wants to hear, but needs to hear, even if it ruffles a few feathers? And that doesn't necessarily mean being rude or loud or edgy for the sake of attention. It means you're being clear, opinionated, and distinctly you. Authenticity. We've talked about that so many times on this podcast. If you're not sure whether or not, if you're not sure whether your voice is strong enough, then I would suggest trying this. Read one of your most recent posts out loud. Okay, not to yourself, read it out loud, and then ask, could this have been written by any brand in my industry? If the answer is yes, then it's not your voice. It's a template. And that's just the truth of the matter. The brands that are winning in 2025 are those who are dangerously clear in how they sound. You hear them once and you remember them. Safe just doesn't work anymore. Algorithms reward engagement, right? But engagement comes from emotional reaction. And emotional reaction comes from, you guessed it, voice. Your audience doesn't want a robot with brand guidelines. They want a real human behind the screen who, as much as I hate to say it, who has a vibe, who has a story, a stance, who has a soul. Okay, can I say that? Let's just show people that we have souls. If your brand voice feels like it could work for an accounting firm or maybe even a dog food brand, then you don't have a brand voice. I hate to tell you. The most valuable thing that you can do for your content in 2026 is to stop being so polite. Stop trying to play it safe and start trying to sound real. Because when people feel like they know you, they start to trust you. And then when they trust you, they follow you, they engage with you, and maybe even invest in your product or service, which is exactly what we want. So lesson number 2 of 2025 with social media is that I'm going to guess your brand voice is just too safe. Moving on to lesson number 3 in 2025 that we learned about social media is that idea generation isn't just a creative problem. If I had to guess, you or your team has probably said at some point something like, I'm just not feeling creative right now, or we've already posted about this topic 5 times. How many times have we heard that, right? It's the great content rut. We all have been there. And when you're stuck, it's easy to assume that the problem is creative. But the truth is that idea generation isn't just a creative problem. It's actually a systems problem. It's a process problem. It's a signal interpretation problem. And in episode 7, Ella Gunnell and I unpacked exactly why that is. You see, we tend to assume that idea droughts mean that the team isn't being imaginative enough. But a lot of times the issue isn't imagination, it's infrastructure. If your system for capturing, organizing, and repurposing content ideas is broken, even the most brilliant creatives will run dry. And it usually shows up looking like, maybe you brainstorm once a month and that's it. Or you're only pulling from internal ideas, not audience data. Or you have no central idea bank, which shocks me, the amount of companies and brands that don't have an idea bank to reference when, your brain feels like soup. Or you're just waiting for inspiration instead of designing your way to it. We really romanticize idea generation like it's supposed to come to you in the shower or after a long walk in the woods. And sometimes it does, but you can't build a brand around vibes and timing. If your social team feels like it's white knuckling the calendar every month, you probably don't need more creativity. You need more structure. So then the question comes, okay, but how do we do that? Here's what I would recommend. All right. Number 1, create a real-time idea bank. You need to do it. We use a lot of different platforms here at Strella Social Media. You could use a Notion board or a Trello card. Those are 2 that we use. You could use a Slack channel, whatever works for you, but make it always on. Anyone on the team can drop in ideas or screenshots, funny comments, trends they're seeing, post reactions. That's something that we do as well. Anything. And then this becomes your compost pile, right? And the more scraps that you toss in, the richer the soil, the richer the result of the content ideas that you're going to get. The second thing that I would recommend is to schedule different kinds of idea sessions, because it would be easy to say, okay, just have an idea session every month and then just throw everything in at once. But if it's not really focused, then it's not going to be that productive. So number 1, I would have an idea session that I like to call harvest sessions. And what you want to do here is you want to look back at what's working and figure out why. This is going to require you to look at your analytics. But don't worry, let me not get ahead of myself. We're going to talk more about analytics in a moment. So look at what's actually currently already working for your social media content. The second type of idea session that I would suggest is a theme session where you choose one topic and you go really deep across multiple angles or formats. And then the third one would be sort of a repurposing, remixing sort of session where you're taking old posts and finding new ways to repurpose them, not just recycling them, right? You're finding new ways to repurpose them. And then this gives your team a rhythm to idea development. So it's not just, I hope inspiration hits this week. That's not what we're doing. Idea generation, going back to recycling versus, finding new ways to utilize old content, it doesn't mean idea generation, it doesn't have to be new every time, right? There's a mindset shift. Not every idea has to be original to be valuable. Most social media audiences don't even remember what your content look like. They don't know it like you do. If something resonated 6 months ago, revisit it. If a trend applies to your core message, apply it, no matter how many times you've said your core message. Ella said in episode 7, we're not creating for novelty, we're creating for resonance. When your content feels safe, your instinct might be to squeeze your creative brain harder. But great content doesn't start with inspiration. It starts with a plan to find it consistently. And if you build a system for your ideas, you won't have to fear having a blank calendar, because we've all been there and we all know what that feels like. It doesn't have to be a fear of yours if you have the correct structure and process in place to make sure you're consistently coming up with creative ideas. So that is lesson number 3. Moving on to lesson number 4, we want audience signals over gut feelings. This is what I believe is the foundational shift every brand and social media manager needs to make going into 2026. Your gut instinct is not your strategy. Data is, okay? I know, I get it. I'm a creative. You're probably a creative if you're watching this. We love our ideas. Sometimes we may even get like a little high off of a good brainstorm, and we'll tell ourselves, this will go viral. I just feel it. And sometimes we're right, but most of the time, the audience tells us what's working. Not our brand board, not our feeling at 11:30 p.m. when we think we've really like cracked the code. The truth is that if you're not consistently looking at the audience signals, like your saves, shares, comments, average watch time, then you're building your content on sand. Let me give you an example, okay? We had a client, I'm not going to name names, but we had a client who swore that their quote graphics performed the best. They felt it, right? They loved them. Their whole team was on board with these quote graphics. But yet the data told a completely different story. Quote posts were getting really low reach, no saves. They were only being liked by the same 20 super fans over and over. And by super fans, I mean people who probably worked at the brand. Meanwhile, their more casual behind the scenes videos were getting 10 times the reach. They were definitely getting saves, whereas the other ones were not, and triple the amount of comments. And yet they didn't want to pivot. Why? Because they were listening to, or they weren't listening to the audience signals. They were listening to their ego. And that little creative voice that says, but I like it this way, right? We've all been there. So, when I talk about audience signals, what are they? Let's break that down, because not all metrics are created equal, and there are some that matter and some that don't. We all know this. There's vanity metrics and there's the ones that count. But when we say they count, what do they actually mean? So, for example, saves. If you're getting saves, then this is your audience basically saying, I want to revisit this. This is gold, right? They're saying, I like this enough to want to come back to it. The second thing is, and probably the most important, is shares. If you're getting shares, whether that's reposts or people sending your content to other people in their DMs, this is them saying like, oh, this made me laugh, or this made me cry, or this was really meaningful. This is what you want. The more shares, any platform, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, it doesn't matter, you name it. The more shares, the more the algorithm is going to be pleased and the more they're going to push your content out. So we really like that. Comments, this is when your audience is saying, I care enough to speak up. That, and that's a big deal, because I've said it before. Today, the cost of a follower is higher than ever. It used to be that you could get on to social media, you'd see one post from someone and you liked it and you decided to follow them. Now you have to see it 10, 15, 20 times for you to be willing to invest to follow them. Another metric that you really want to keep your eye on is your watch time. I've said it over and over again. We're looking not just to hook people. People always want to talk about hooks. They want to talk about how do you capture attention. Yeah, we know that everybody knows we want to capture attention, but they're forgetting about the fact that we actually want to keep their attention. It's about retention. So we want to watch our watch time. If we're able to hold somebody's attention, that's a big deal. That's something we want to pay attention to. And then, of course, you want to look at your DMs, whether that's just personal messages that are sent to you or replies to stories on Instagram. If you are getting DMs, then you have triggered a direct interaction. That is taking it to another level. Somebody feels comfortable enough, they trust you enough to DM you directly instead of just leaving a comment on a post. It's more intimate, it's more meaningful. You can have a post with 3,000 likes that doesn't do squat for your brand if no one saves or shares it. Meanwhile, a post with 27 saves and 12 shares and 4 likes could lead to your next client. And because those signals tell you what stick, that's why these are so important. Now, I'm not saying become a robot. I'm not saying, let a spreadsheet dictate your every move on social media, but I am saying that smart creatives let data inspire them. Great social media managers don't guess what to post. They reverse engineer what's already working so they can do more of that, right? You need to look at your top performing posts and ask yourself, what format was this? What emotion did I tap into? What hook did I use? Was it controversial? Was it relatable? Was it valuable? These are all questions you should constantly be asking yourself about your top performing content. And then once you've done that, then you double down, you remix it, you refine it. You don't reinvent the wheel every week. You reinforce what's working. Don't just show up on social media with a message. You have to show up with ears, right? Active listening. Because if your audience is giving you clues and you ignore them in favor of your gut, you're not doing strategy, you're doing improv. And your budget is on the line with that. We don't want to do improv with that big of a budget on the line. So that is lesson number 4. We want audience signals over our gut feelings. And finally, lesson number 5 of 2025 with social media is brand strategy is not the same as social media strategy. They are 2 completely different things. This is a trap I see way too many good brands falling into, okay? They think their brand strategy is their social media strategy, and I hate to tell you, but it's not, okay? And look, I get it. You've worked hard on your branding. You've got your fonts and your colors and your brand voice, and your mission is polished. Your messaging, it's aligned. But guess what? None of that guarantees that your social media will actually work, because social isn't just a broadcast platform. It's not a brochure. Social media is a living, breathing, fast-moving conversation, and it needs a strategy that matches its pace and purpose. Your brand strategy is really the foundation, but your social media strategy is the execution layer that makes your brand come alive in public. Most teams, social media teams, whether you're one person or you've got 15 people on a team, a lot of times we treat social media like a checkbox, right? Like, so check off, resize this graphic, paste this mission statement, post it on Instagram, wait. And then when it flops, they're shocked. And if you don't know if this is you or not, let me give you some common signs that your brand strategy is really overpowering your social media strategy. If you have a social media channel where everything looks polished, but it all feels the same, you've got the perfect grid, but no personality. There's no curiosity, no surprise. And that's what makes people scroll past, then it's more likely that your brand strategy is overpowering your social media strategy. Or maybe your cadence is campaign-based and not conversation-based. You're operating like a marketing calendar, not like a content creator. Another sign is that you're recycling assets instead of remixing the stories, right? That flyer that you made for your annual event, it doesn't belong on Instagram Reels, my friends. It just doesn't. Or that testimonial that you have, it's not going to cut it on TikTok. That's just the bottom line. And you would be surprised at how many brands we see do this. That is a signal that your brand strategy is overpowering your social media strategy. So how do you fix it? The real answer here is that you have to build a social first strategy. And that means that you look at the world through a different lens. All right. There's really 3 things that you need to focus on. Number 1 is the pacing. Brand campaigns are quarterly. Social trends, they shift weekly, sometimes daily, sometimes hourly. I'm not even kidding. You've got to move fast, like test quick and Don't get too caught up on one idea because it's going to shift at any moment, and you have to keep that in mind. The second thing that you really need to focus on is your format. Your glossy videos, they're probably beautiful. I'll give it to you. But unless they hook people in that first 2 seconds, then they're going to be invisible. That means that, you really have to focus hard on that hook and capturing people's attention. But also, you need to focus on platform-specific edits. Each platform really gives a lot of tools and features to customize content to that specific platform. And there's not enough brands taking advantage of this. Is it more work? Yes. Hate to say it, it is. I'm not going to lie about that. But it's something that has to be focused on, because if you're just taking one piece of, say you have one video and you're just taking that same video and putting it on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, and you're expecting it to perform really well on all of them, you're delusional. That sounds so tough, but I'm being serious. It's just not the name of the game. The third thing that you need to focus on are feedback loops. Like we talked about with analytics and audience signals, social gives you real-time evidence, real-time understanding. If something's getting saved or shared, you need to lean into that. If it's flopping, you need to pivot, and you need to pivot quick. Now, this doesn't mean that you're, chasing trends blindly, but it does mean that you're listening. You're measuring, you're adjusting. And there are a few brands that are there's a number of brands that are getting it right, but I'm going to give you some examples. Number one would be Duolingo. Everybody talks about Duolingo. Their brand is educational, right? But their social media strategy, I would categorize as unhinged. Scrub Daddy, another one, unhinged. They've personified their mascot, and they embraced the TikTok chaos that it is. And guess what? They're memorable. They didn't abandon their brand. They translated it into a language of the platform. Another example would be the Washington Post. Yes, the Washington Post has a TikTok team. Shocking, I know. But instead of just posting articles, they create skits. They have explainers and hilarious news videos. Why? Because their social media strategy honors the format, not just the brand. And this is something that you have to take into account. Okay, if you've made it this far, you get it. Social media in 2025 is not about doing more. It's about doing it smarter. And it's not about chasing every trend. It's about understanding your audience and delivering content with purpose. So just as a recap, what the big 5 lessons of 2025 are with social media that we need to translate into 2026. Number 1, good content isn't enough anymore. Number 2, your brand voice is probably too polite. Number 3, idea generation isn't just a creative problem, it's a process problem. Number 4, audience signals over our gut feelings. And number 5, brand strategy does not equal your social media strategy. If you're ready to level up your social strategy in 2026 and you want a team that actually understands how this landscape works, then book a discovery call with us. There's a link right in the description. No fluff, no sales pressure, just real strategy, real ideas, and real results. So let's make 2026 the year your content finally hits. Thank you for being here for season 3 of Untamed Social. I'm Lainey Goff, and I'll see you next season. Bye.